All right, guys. Our next session is coming up. If you guys can sit down, we would love to have you stick around. It's only 20 minutes long, and it's a patient perspective, which I think is pretty awesome. So we have Amy Eiges, and she's going to be talking about food addiction and obesity. So we would love for you to welcome her on stage by clapping. Thank you.
Testing.
I'll tune it when you get up there.
Okay. I can put it in my back pocket.
She's coming,
Yeah.
I promise.
Is that good?
You're good. You're perfect.
Okay, great.
All right. Amy, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. You mic'd up. You got the clicker? Did they give you that?
No, not yet.
All right, guys. Are you ready? Do you need to stand up and shake? Are you good? All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, hi. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sticking around. My name is Amy Eiges, and I'm going to talk today about the patient perspective on obesity and food addiction. What I'm sharing isn't academic. It's my lived experience about what happens when we stop believing we're broken and we start to see ourselves with compassion. Okay. First, technical difficulty. There we go. Okay. So, about me, my personal and professional disclosures. I'm a health coach, and I'm responsible for the corporate wellness program at Torrid Health, Dr. Tro's practice. It's a medical practice that supports patients with reversing obesity and type 2, other metabolic conditions like type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, fatty liver. I have personally achieved significant success with a low-carb ketogenic diet after many, many, many decades of failing with countless other programs, doctors, and so-called experts. But my talk today isn't about what to eat and more about why it is so hard. What to do when nutrition and diet and surgery and drugs aren't enough, and what changes when we stop hating ourselves. And like many of us, well, I should say, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not a dietitian, and full disclosure, I have not taken a single science class since high school. My art history degree from the University of Michigan makes me academically qualified to discuss Da Vinci's drawings of human anatomy, but not much else in this regard. And yet, like most of us in this room, food addiction and obesity are my area of expertise and what I have studied for over 50 years, nearly to the exclusion of all else. So this is what I looked like when the genius advice one doctor gave me was to, and I quote, take up an extreme sport like mountain climbing. At the time, I weighed over 400 pounds, as I had for most of my adult life, and I live, and I still do, in Manhattan, about 100 miles from the nearest mountain range. I left the appointment that day with a prescription for fen-phen, and many of us are old enough to remember how that story ended. And I thought something like, I wish I wasn't so lazy. I am so disgusting. What is wrong with me? I was around 30 years old at the time, and by then I had already tried nearly everything many times over. I was therapized and analyzed. I had opti-fasted. I had yoga. I had counted calories. I had counted points. I had eaten endless, gloopy, frozen, disgusting meals, and I had eaten intuitively. I had followed all the rules. I counted all the points. And I still ended up living in a body that felt like it was serving a death row prison sentence for a crime it didn't commit. Every time someone with obesity seeks help and tries yet again, it's an act of courage. Despite all evidence to the contrary that this time won't be any different, we keep showing up. Each new doctor, each new program comes with the risk of humiliation before we even make it to an exam room. Chairs that don't fit, gowns that don't close, scales that don't go high enough. And once we see the doctor, too often we're judged by the very people who are meant to help us. We carry the extraordinarily deep shame of failure and are told again and again that our struggle is all our fault. Yet despite that, we keep trying. And if that isn't courage, I don't know what is. Doctors and the diet industry should be gateways to healing, but too often they're sources of lasting trauma. The answer is always the same. Eat less, move more. Practical, but they never offer practical advice on how to do that. For decades, every doctor I saw only saw my obesity and didn't offer solutions, only disapproval. So eventually, I just stopped going altogether. For nearly 20 years, I mostly avoided doctors, not because I didn't care about my health. I cared extraordinarily deeply. My mother had passed away very suddenly from congestive heart failure from type 2 diabetes. And I knew that was my trajectory if I didn't do something drastic, but still I avoided going to doctors. I didn't need an expert, quote unquote expert, to tell me how awful I was. I had the mirror to tell me that every single day. So I lived in fear, going to bed every night, wondering if that was the night my heart was going to finally give out. When I did venture to get help, not one expert ever looked me in the eyes and asked me, how did you get here? And honestly, even if I had, I'm not sure I would have had the vocabulary back then or the insight to really explain it, because I was buried under so much self-blame and shame. They always said the same thing. I needed more discipline, more willpower, more self-control. But somehow I was also told just to have a little bit of cake. That's like telling someone to try to put out a fire, to pour just a little bit of gasoline to try to put out the fire. It took me nearly 50 years to realize that my struggle wasn't about willpower, it was biochemistry. When I finally tried a low-carb approach, only one doctor, Tro, who you heard from just a little bit earlier, explained to me that the food itself was fueling my hunger. And for the first time, I ate in a way that quieted the flame instead of feeding it. I finally knew what it felt like to be full, to eat foods that were satiating. And over the next few years, I went on to lose more than 200 pounds. I didn't need more willpower. I needed understanding. But for years, I woke up thinking every day, what am I going to do to lose weight? And I literally dieted my way to over 400 pounds. How did I get there? How did we get there when millions of us are trying so incredibly hard, surrounded by endless advice and quick fixes, all saying the same thing, eat less, move more? And when we fail, they are only too quick to sell us their next miracle, their next shiny promise, their next supplement, and their next $1,200 a month drug. So where does it leave us? Where did it leave me? Feeling like a failure. How many diets have you failed at? How many Mondays have you started over only to throw it out by midweek? And who did you blame for that failure? We never blame the plan. We are the failure. The truth is, there is no diet, no matter how well designed and well formulated. There is no drug. There is no surgery that cannot be outsmarted by our clever brains looking for a loophole. This isn't about self-control. This is about how our brains and our bodies are hijacked by food itself. And while nutrition does matter, it's not the only thing. Low carb and keto get a lot of things right and helped me personally reclaim my health. But food addiction is often ignored, leaving many of us feeling unseen. Weight Watchers offers community, but their everything in moderation stance is deeply problematic, and it's a setup for those of us whose hunger burns like a fire that never goes out. Calorie counting, it's the same. It's like gambling in a casino. The casino at the house is always going to win, and eventually hunger is also always going to win. Intuitive eating and health at every size offer very important truths and were very helpful for me personally. Healing, acceptance, compassion, but they both virtually ignore nutrition. The real path forward isn't about choosing one path or one philosophy. It's about taking the best of each and building something honest, compassionate, and sustainable. And if you're lucky, like me, you stumble upon a doctor or a medical practice that finally offers real compassion, real support, a real education that's life-changing to help break the cycle and make real change. And indeed, some people go keto or have surgery or try a new drug, and they lose all the weight they want. They don't have cravings, they never struggle, they never put on any weight, they never regain the weight they lost, and they live happily ever after. The end. And then there's the rest of us, exhausted, battered, with a little PTSD with every half a pound gain, wondering why we can't seem to get in on the fairy tale that we keep reading about and hearing about. And indeed, when I first lost a lot of weight, it did feel like a fairy tale after a lifetime of battling. But eventually, I landed back on the ground and felt a lot more like this guy, just beat up, bruised, and wondering what went wrong and why I couldn't get in on the fairy tale. I felt better, my health was better, I lost a lot of weight, I saw real progress, but I found out something I never could have predicted, and something, honestly, that the old 400-pound version of me would have rolled her eyes so far in the back of her head to hear me say now, which was that losing weight wasn't enough. and that in many ways that was the easiest part of the journey. The old voices came roaring back. This again. What's wrong with me? I'm broken. I didn't have enough willpower. I'll just try harder next time. It is exhausting, and there has got to be a better way. And while this is a food problem, even the best plan can be outmaneuvered by our relationship with food and what I believe is the cycle of addiction, which defies logic and can overtake nearly every aspect of our lives. So it's not a diet issue, but it's also not a diet issue. And after losing the weight and getting my nutrition right, I found myself continually overeating or binging, and that's when I had to start asking some real deep questions. What this is a cycle of obesity. There's a lot on this slide, and I can go into it at another point, but this shows the cycle of obesity that I was trapped in for years, the never-ending diet binge loop, the constant battle with hunger and cravings, the belief that if I just tried harder, I dieted harder, my fitness palate harder, I could get to the other side. And each failure brought more shame, more self-blame, and another desperate attempt. Food became my comfort. Not true relief, but a familiar drug of choice. I clung to it because it was all that I knew. Looking back, I believe my own personal journey to obesity and food addiction was the perfect storm of genetics, a toxic food environment, terrible professional advice, depression, sometimes mild, sometimes more pronounced, and then heaped on years of shame and learned helplessness. And healing meant dismantling those layers one by one. Recovery wasn't solely about physical weight, it was about shedding the emotional weight of every failed diet, every doctor's waiting office, every judgmental doctor, every Monday morning fresh start. And the truth is, much of what keeps us stuck isn't just external. Doctors caught in dogma or diet culture itself, which is pretty much that middle circle, is the external voices. But it's really the ones that I want to talk about today are really the internal voices that we've absorbed along the way. Those insidious, powerful voices that convince us at every turn that we'll never break free. I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk about just how quickly some of those external messages can seep in and take over our psyches by talking about an experiment that took place in 1945. A physiologist named Ansel Keys at the University of Minnesota set out to study the effects of prolonged semi-starvation after World War II, and this experiment became known as the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. 36 healthy young men volunteered for a 14-month study. The first 3 months, they ate a normal diet of 3,200 calories a day. Then came 6 months of semi-starvation, which I think is interesting to note that their semi-starvation was 1,600 calories a day. And that consisted of 2 daily high-carb and low-fat meals, and they walked about 22 miles a week. After that came a rehabilitation period, a controlled refeeding phase, and then an unrestricted one. So what happened? The next part is sort of staggering. The men lost 25% of their body weight, but their metabolisms dropped about the same amount. They felt constantly cold, fatigued, and weak. Their heart shrank, their hair thinned, and muscle mass never fully returned. But also, most notably, they became obsessed with food, collecting recipes, hoarding cookbooks, talking about food and eating nonstop. And some ended up developing ritualistic, neurotic eating behaviors where none had previously existed. Many developed depression, anxiety, irritability, and social withdrawal. Their libidos diminished or disappeared. Some had emotional breakdowns. One man self-mutilated, and all behaviors, again, that hadn't existed before the 6 months of semi-starvation. When they were finally allowed to eat freely, many binged uncontrollably, eating 8,000 to 10,000 calories a day, and reported never feeling satisfied with their food. Even after regaining the weight, their hunger signals stayed disrupted, and some never returned to normal. So I ask you, if 6 months of a calorie restriction did all of that, what do you think happens? What do you suppose happens when you do that for decades, when you diet and fail for decades? For me, it wasn't 6 months. It was 50 years of diet failure. So next time you ask yourself, why can't I just stick to a diet? Why can't I do this? Remember, you are not weak and you are not broken. You are fighting powerful biology designed to keep you alive and decades of conditioning that keeps you stuck. What those men experienced wasn't failure. It was the body doing its job, protecting us from starvation. After decades of dieting and regaining, of course it's hard. The shocking thing isn't that we struggle. The miracle is that we keep trying. Because diet culture may start outside of us through media, through experts' opinions, but over time it seeps in and it shapes the very being of who we are. Diets and diet culture almost always leave us hating ourselves, and they sometimes even result in self-harm. They turn us into people who can't stop thinking about food, who end up with disordered eating. They ignore our biology, our psychology, our humanity. They replace intuition with rigid external rules that have nothing to do with brain chemistry or, for that matter, real life. And diets are by definition short-term and set us up for deprivation, obsession, and failure. Diet culture is so prevalent, so woven into our lives and our brains that most of the time we don't even notice it. They're a part of our societal DNA, and internalized failure, their genetic expression. Indoctrinated into this failed system before we're even old enough to consent, we're taught over and over and over again the same poisonous message that we cannot possibly be trusted. The message is clear. It's always our fault. Earlier this year, Weight Watchers, once the gold standard of smart and sensible dieting, filed for bankruptcy, buried under nearly $1 billion in debt. After decades of selling points and promises, even their endless rebrands couldn't keep up with their dismal success rates. I was six years old when I first went to my first Weight Watchers meeting with my mother, and I still remember the woman that weighed my mother looked me up and down and spelled something that started with an O to my mother. And I was so young, I didn't know what she was spelling, but I already had internalized the message that she was calling me fat. And that moment marked for me a shame that lasted for decades. I wasn't just a casual Weight Watchers member, I was a believer. I joined more than 35 times. That's a low estimate, I actually think. I went to Weight Watchers summer camps. I lived through every version, the exchanges where you had to eat fish 3 to 5 times a week and liver once a week. I'm sure there's people in here that can remember that. Points, gloopy frozen meals, 0-point foods. Each plan promised hope and taught me the same lesson. I couldn't possibly trust myself. My body was a problem to be solved, and only their system held the solution. Eventually, I left Weight Watchers behind and focused on metabolic health. And years later, I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor that Dr. Cho talked about earlier, and I tested one of their 0-point foods. Within minutes, my blood sugar spiked 60 points and then crashed. It left me shaky and starving. Oh my God, it was like someone put my decades of failure under a microscope and brought it into sharp focus. One 0-point food did all of that. That was why I could never make Weight Watchers work, exactly that. Human chemistry does not fit into a one-size-fits-all program built on quote-unquote moderation. It wasn't about willpower, it was biology and psychology. It was insulin and dopamine and conditioning. No one ever explained that to me, ever, actually until Tro. Not once in those years of sitting on those uncomfortable, awful metal chairs in those fluorescent Weight Watchers terrible rooms. So every time I failed, I blamed myself, never the system that I had bought into. Like many of you, I spent years trying to contort myself into their mold, white-knuckling through hunger, believing that it was me that was broken. And every time I rejoined, I thought, this time is going to be different. So yes, when I read that the company was collapsing, I felt a flicker of grief, but not for the company, but for every version of me that lived inside of it. The 400-pound woman who woke up every day desperate to lose weight, the teenager who thought that being smaller would make her lovable, and the 6-year-old girl who carried around that shame for 50 years with decades of compounding interest before she even had a word for it. So if diets aren't the answer, what are we supposed to do? What if we want to lose weight, feel healthy, move freely in our bodies? How do we reconcile what we know about insulin resistance and metabolic health when restriction and dieting set us up for failure? Diet may be a 4-letter word, but weight loss, health, and well-being are not. And when we finally step back and see what we are really up against, the biology, the food environment, the shame, the false promises, only then can we stop punishing ourselves and start getting practical about our own healing. I've heard it, I've lived it, the cruel self-talk around food. I'm weak, I'm bad, I failed again. Over time, the shame becomes heavier than the food itself. And what this cycle is it'll be familiar to all of you, but there's a lot of words here, but it really is that discomfort leads to eating, eating leads to dieting, dieting leads to more eating, and the shame keeps it all going. Shame isn't a side effect, it's the fuel. While we obsess over calories and macros and carbs and medications and surgeries, and shame is quietly running the show, it's the kindling that keeps the cycle going. Diet culture will tell us that the path to worthiness is paved with hunger, deprivation, and self-loathing. It promises that if we punish ourselves and shrink ourselves enough, and we'll finally earn happiness, approval, and love. For years, my unspoken mantra was hate myself thin. And I believe the deeper that self-hatred, the closer I'd get to the freedom from the 400-pound prison that I was living in. So when I found intuitive eating, I felt like a breath of fresh air, permission to exist as I was, to feed myself without embarrassment. It was radical and freeing until I realized acceptance didn't erase discomfort. You can love yourself and still feel trapped in a body that's inflamed, exhausted, or severely limited. Self-love doesn't mean ignoring suffering. It means meeting it with compassion. The goal is not to hate ourselves into transformation. It's to love ourselves into healing. I hear another version of that voice all the time, both from people that come to Toward Health for help and full disclosure from the echoes in my own head that still very much live here. You don't understand. I'm different. I'm worse. And if anyone knew the real me, they'd be horrified. That's why conferences like this and the work I do at Toward Health matter so much, because connection is the antidote to shame. And when we speak truth about our struggles, we remind each other that we're not alone. Even after I broke free from diet culture and found relief through low-carb eating, I still believe I was the exception, still carrying shame like an armor. But hear me, there is nothing that anybody in this room could tell me you have done with food that would shock me. Nothing, because I have done it too, and you are not alone. Shame is the language of obesity and addiction. It is sticky. It convinces us that we're broken beyond repair, that we don't deserve healing. But when we silence that voice, we take our first breath, because that voice that says, why bother? That's not you. That's the addiction talking. So why did I bother? Because some small, stubborn part of me believed there had to be something better, a more peaceful way to live. I didn't start by knowing what I wanted. I started by knowing what I didn't. And recovery didn't begin with losing 200 pounds. It began with one radical act, pretending to love myself even when I definitely did not, because hating myself had never worked. It only ever kept me stuck. Acceptance was the turning point. Accepting my right to good health care, and to a body that could move and live unencumbered. And despite the message we are bombarded with at every turn, the size of our bodies are not a measure of our self-worth. You deserve, and we deserve, dignity and respect no matter what the body you're living in. If hating ourselves worked, wouldn't we all be fixed by now? So respect your body, let go of regret, honor the person who got you this far, because that person kept you alive. It brought you here. You don't belong in the past, you belong here, moving forward. Now, this is the part that is going to be hard for a lot of people, but it's really trusting ourselves, because it's the opposite of what most of us have been taught to do. The biggest shift in my journey came when I stopped outsourcing wisdom. No more waiting for the next perfect diet or obsessively tracking macros or points or looking for someone else to tell me what to do. Because let's be honest, I think probably everybody in this room, if you don't already have a PhD, could get a PhD in dieting. Most of us don't need another diet hack, another guru selling weird supplements, or another plan. We already know so much. And yet, why do we still find ourselves struggling? Why? Because more information is not the answer. I don't have a diet issue. I've lost over 200 pounds. I am, in fact, an expert at losing weight. My biggest battle wasn't food. It was everything that drove me to eat. That's where the real work began. This is not to say that you shouldn't ask for help and get help, but make sure it passes your own common sense test. I certainly could not have done this alone. I found a trusted guide in Dr. Tro and the Toward Health team, who, shockingly, I am now lucky enough to work alongside. And I spent years avoiding doctors, and now I work with them every day. But I just kept going. I kept showing up imperfectly, but consistently. Cho gave me an education, but then he gently guided me back to what I intellectually understood to be true, but would routinely get sidetracked by all the other things that I talked about, all the experts, all the hacks, all the guides. We all know what to do. I'm too far gone. I'm broken. This will fail, like all the other times. Sound familiar? But what if it doesn't? What if this time is different? Not because it's easier, because you refuse to give up. Would you give up if you knew success was guaranteed? Because guess what? If you don't give up, success is guaranteed. I'm going to say something that not a lot of people really say out loud. This is hard. This is really hard. My dramatic before and after pictures, Dr. Cho's pictures, those don't show you all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into this. They don't show you the moments of extraordinary doubt, the nights where you were just like, I don't know that I can do this. The hundreds of times, and Cho can swear to it, that I had to pick myself up and push forward. This journey isn't fast, and it's not always fair, but it is certainly worth it. You are not a project. You are not a before and after photo. You are a whole person doing hard things. I'm still learning every single day. So if it feels hard for you, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're human, and it means this is hard work. But living in a body that hurts, that feels trapped, is so much harder. Losing weight when you walk in morbidly obese shoes for years means that your body is no longer a public battlefield, but that ceasefire is often superficial. It takes daily work to remember that a smaller body is merely a conduit to a more fulfilling life. It is not the purpose or the definition of one. Do yourself a favor and avoid some of the mistakes that I made. Don't buy into the notion that a perfect life exists when you hit a number on the scale. This is a lie built on quicksand. So if you're struggling with your weight and you're frustrated by the process, thinking your journey will never lead you where you want it to go, here is my best advice. Love yourself now. Work on your relationship with food and body image now. Because while you're busy of dreaming about one day on the horizon where you hit some number on a scale, you end up missing the amazingness that is happening before your very eyes, that you have not yet given up. You are still here. Despite all you have faced, you are still showing up for yourself. So love yourself now. Learn to love the before while you're chasing the after. Not every season of this journey will be about weight loss. Sometimes the victory is simply holding steady. Sometimes it's about healing your relationship with food and with yourself in ways that can't be measured on a scale. And then there will be times where you do everything right. You show up, you make the choices, you're consistent, and still the scale doesn't move, not for weeks and not for months. The road ahead can feel impossibly long and painfully hard. But that moment, that hard moment, that is where the change is built. That's where resilience is born. So keep going, put one foot in front of the other, choose your hard, and keep moving forward because you're worth showing up for, and it is never, ever too late to be who you were meant to be.